The chamber was old. It was older than most stars that humans had ever seen. The walls were made of a dark stone that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. 12 massive seats rose in a circle, each one carved for a different species, each one holding a being that had watched civilizations rise and fall. Like waves on a beach, Ambassador Alina Vance stood in the center of this circle. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had served humanity for 40 years in the diplomatic corps. She had shaken hands with creatures that had no hands. She had learned 17 alien languages. She had believed that humanity had found its place among the stars. Now she knew she had been wrong. The Valthari Archon sat in the largest seat. His body was long and thin, covered in scales that shifted from blue to purple as he moved. His eyes were like 2 moons, pale and cold and ancient. When he spoke, his voice filled the chamber like water filling a cup. The council has reached its decision, the Archon said. Humanity is found guilty. Alina did not flinch. She had expected this. The trial had lasted for 6 months, but the outcome had been decided long before the first witness spoke. She had seen it in the way the council members looked at human delegates. She had heard it in the whispers that stopped when humans entered a room. Fear. They were afraid of humanity. Guilty of what exactly? Alina asked. Her voice was calm. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The Archon lifted a long, thin arm and gestured to a floating screen that appeared in the air. Images began to play. Human ships, human colonies, human scientists working in laboratories. 40 years ago, humanity discovered faster than light travel. The Archon said, "This is not unusual. Many species discover this technology. What is unusual is that humanity discovered it in only 200 years of space exploration. The Valthari took 3,000 years. The Kreth took 4,000. The Orim took nearly 5,000. Is being quick a crime?" Alina asked. "It is a warning," another voice said. This came from Counselor Thylak of the Orim Collective. He was a massive creature, like a mountain given life. His skin was gray and rough like stone, and his eyes burned with an orange light deep within his skull. "Your species does not know how to be patient. You do not know how to wait. Patience is not survival," Alina said. "Our sun will die. One day, our planet will freeze. Should we have waited for that? You should have waited for permission," the Archon said. 40 years ago, you were welcomed into the galactic community as a junior species. You were given trade rights. You were given access to knowledge that took us millions of years to gather. You were told to grow slowly, to learn your place, to respect the order of things. And we did. Alina said. "No." Archon replied. His voice grew cold. "You did not. In 40 years, your population has spread to 112 worlds. Your scientists have begun experimenting with technologies that are forbidden. Your military has grown to a size that rivals the Kreth hegemony. Your people ask questions that should not be asked." Alina almost laughed. "Almost questions. You are putting humanity on trial because we ask questions. We are putting humanity on trial because you are dangerous," Counselor Thylak said. He leaned forward, and the light in his eyes grew brighter. "Every species in this council learned long ago that there are limits. There are boundaries that should not be crossed. There are doors that should not be opened. But humans see a door. And they must open it, they see a limit. And they must break it, they see the impossible, and they call it a challenge. That is who we are, Alina said. Would you have us be something else? We would have you be safe, the Archon said. For everyone, including yourselves. The screen changed again. New images appeared, human soldiers fighting in a border conflict, human ships testing new weapons, human colonies expanding into territories that had been marked as protected. Your species has been in space for less than 3 centuries, the Archon continued. In that time you have fought 11 wars. Among yourselves, you have created weapons capable of destroying planets. You have modified your own bodies with machines and genetics. You treat the universe as if it belongs to you. The universe belongs to everyone, Alina said. The universe belongs to those who respect it, Counselor Thylik said, and humanity does not. Humanity takes. Humanity consumes. Humanity grows like a fire, and fires must be controlled before they burn everything. Alina looked around the chamber. 12 species, 12 sets of eyes watching her. Some looked sad, some looked angry, some looked relieved that this moment had finally come, but none of them looked willing to change their minds. What is our sentence? She asked. The Archon stood. He was taller than Alina had realized. Nearly 3 m of ancient cold power. Humanity is hereby exiled from council space, he said. All human colonies within our borders will be evacuated. All human citizens will be gathered and transported to the edge of known space. You will be given your ships and enough supplies to survive for 5 years. After that you are on your own. Exiled to where? Alina asked. The Archon waved his hand, and a new image appeared on the screen. It showed a region of space that was almost entirely black. No stars, no planets, just endless empty darkness stretching out forever. The umbral expanse, the Archon said. It lies beyond the galactic rim. It is a place of dead stars and broken space. No species has ever explored it because there is nothing there to find. No resources, no life, no hope. You are sending us to die, Alina said. We are sending you away, the Archon replied. What happens after that is up to you. If humanity is truly as adaptable as you claim, then you will survive. If not, then the galaxy will be safer. Alina felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, not anger, something deeper, something harder. How long do we have? She asked. 3 months, the Archon said. Your people will be gathered, your ships will be prepared, and then you will leave. You will not return to council space. Any human ship that crosses back into our territory will be destroyed without warning. The chamber fell silent. Alina looked at each of the 12 council members in turn. She memorized their faces, their species, their names. She would remember them. Her children would remember them. Her grandchildren would remember them. May I speak one last time? She asked. The Archon nodded. Alina straightened her back. She was old and tired, and she knew that she might not survive the journey ahead, but she was human, and humans did not go quietly. You are making a mistake, she said. Her voice echoed through the ancient chamber. Not because we will come back for revenge, not because we will destroy you, but because you do not understand what you are doing. You look at humanity and you see a threat. You see a fire that must be put out, But fire is not just destruction. Fire is warmth, fire is light, fire is the thing that pushes back the darkness. She pointed at the image of the umbral expanse. That vast ocean of nothing. You are sending us into the darkest place in the universe, she said. You think it will kill us, but you are wrong. Humanity was born in darkness. Our ancestors lived in caves surrounded by predators with nothing but fire to keep them alive. We learned to survive. We learned to make the dark afraid of us. The Archon's expression did not change. Pretty words, but words will not help you in the expanse. No, Alina agreed. They will not, but we will remember this day. We will remember every face in this chamber. We will remember that when we reached out in friendship, you responded with exile, and one day the universe will see which of us made the right choice. She turned and walked toward the door. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. Ambassador Vance. The Archon called out. She stopped but did not turn around. Do not hope for the day you describe, the Archon said. The Council has watched species rise and fall for millions of years. Humanity is young. The expanse is not. It will swallow you whole, and in 1,000 years no one will remember your name. Alina smiled, though no one could see it. Then you have nothing to worry about, she said. And she walked out of the chamber, leaving the Council in silence. The evacuation took exactly 3 months. 300 million humans were pulled from their homes, their jobs, their lives. They were put on ships and told to gather what they could carry. Everything else would be left behind. Alina watched from the command deck of the flagship, a massive vessel called the Horizon's Edge. Around her, thousands of ships were forming up into a fleet. Some were military vessels, armed and armored. Most were civilian transports, colony ships, cargo haulers pressed into service. A few were nothing more than converted mining platforms held together with hope and welding torches. Captain Marcus Chen stood beside her. He was a young man, barely 40, but he had been chosen to command the fleet because he was the best navigator humanity had ever produced. He could read the stars like other people read books. 300 million people, he said quietly, and only enough supplies for 5 years. Then we have 5 years to find more, Alina said. In the umbral expanse, Marcus shook his head. There's nothing out there. The Council probes mapped it centuries ago. Dead space, broken space. The laws of physics don't even work right in some areas. Then we will learn new laws, Alina said. Marcus looked at her. There was something in his eyes that she had seen in many humans over the past 3 months. Fear mixed with something else. Something stubborn, something defiant. You really believe we can survive? He asked. I believe we have no choice, Alina said. And when humans have no choice, we find a way. We always find a way. The last ships joined the fleet. 300 million souls. Everything that remained of humanity's presence among the stars. The Council's warships surrounded them, weapons armed, making sure they did not try to run. Alina opened a channel to the entire fleet. Her face appeared on every screen, in every ship, seen by every human who was about to be cast into the void. My name is Alina Vance, she said. Most of you know me. For the past 40 years I have tried to find humanity a place in the galactic community. I failed. Today we are being exiled, cast out, thrown away like garbage. Because the council fears what we might become. She paused. Around her she could feel the weight of 300 million people listening. I will not lie to you, she continued. The road ahead will be hard. Many of us will not survive. The umbral expanse is a place of darkness and danger, and we are going in blind. But I want you to remember something. Remember it on the days when you want to give up. Remember it when the darkness feels endless. Remember it when you think there is no hope. She leaned forward, and her eyes burned with a fire that 3 months of defeat had not been able to put out. We are human, she said. We crossed oceans in wooden boats. We climbed mountains with bare hands. We walked on the moon when our technology was barely more advanced than fire and wheels. We have faced extinction 100 times, and every single time we have survived, not because we were stronger than our enemies, not because we were smarter, but because we refused to die. She pointed toward the darkness beyond the fleet. That is the umbral expanse. Council thinks it will be our grave. They think they are watching the end of humanity. But they are wrong. They are watching the beginning, because we will not just survive out there. We will build. We will grow. We will become something that they cannot imagine. And one day, when they have forgotten our names, we will return, and on that day, they will remember what it means to underestimate humanity. The channel closed. For a long moment there was silence throughout the fleet. Then slowly a sound began to build. It started on one ship, then spread to another, then another. It was not a cheer. It was not a song. It was something deeper, something older. It was the sound of 300 million humans taking a breath together, preparing for the darkness, refusing to be afraid. Captain Marcus Chen looked at Elena. There were tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. Give the order, Elena said. Take us home. Marcus nodded. He turned to his crew and spoke the words that would change humanity forever. All ships prepare for jump. Destination: the umbral expanse. The engines of 3,000 ships powered up together. The stars around them stretched and bent. As space itself began to fold, the council warships watched in silence, their weapons still armed, their crews relieved that the human problem was finally being solved. The horizon's edge was the last ship to jump. Elena stood at the viewport, watching council space disappear behind her. She saw the distant light of the worlds humanity had built, the colonies they had created, the dreams they had been forced to leave behind. We will remember, she whispered. And one day, we will return. The ship jumped. Light disappeared, and humanity entered the darkness. The first sight of the umbral expanse stole the breath from everyone who saw it. It was nothing. Literally nothing. The screen showed only black. The sensors detected only silence. Where there should have been stars, there was emptiness. Where there should have been light, there was only the cold, endless dark. Elena stood on the command deck, the weight of that darkness pressing against her. For the first time since the trial, she felt truly afraid. Report, she said. Quietly, Captain Chen was staring at his instruments, his face pale. The fleet has arrived intact, all ships accounted for. But the readings... He shook his head. I've never seen anything like this. There's nothing out there, no stars within range, no planets, no asteroids. Just nothing, there must be. Something, Alina said, if there is our instruments can't find it. Chen looked up at her. The council wasn't lying. This place is dead. Alina walked to the viewport. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and stared into the darkness. 300 million people, 5 years of supplies, and nothing but emptiness for light years in every direction. It would have been easy to give up. It would have been easy to despair. But Alina Vance had lived too long and seen too much to surrender to the dark. Then we will find what cannot be found, she said. We will map the unmappable. We will survive the unsurvivable. This is humanity, Captain. This is what we do. She turned to face the crew. They were scared. She could see it in their eyes, but beneath the fear there was something else, the same stubborn fire that had carried humanity from caves to stars. Send a message to all ships, she said. Tell them to rest. Tell them to eat. Tell them to hold their families close. Tomorrow we begin. Tomorrow we start building our future. She looked back at the darkness one last time. The council thinks they have killed us, she said quietly. They are wrong. They have just set us free. The fleet hung in the void. 3,000 ships carrying the last hope of humanity. Around them, the umbral expanse waited, dark and silent and hungry, but humanity had faced the dark before, and humanity had always won. The exile had begun. The story was just starting. The first year in the umbral expanse killed 100,000 people. They died in ways that no one had expected. Ships broke down and could not be repaired. Food ran out faster than anyone had planned. Radiation storms appeared from nowhere and tore through hull plating like paper. Strange gravitational waves pulled vessels off course and sent them spinning into the endless dark, never to be seen again. But the worst deaths came from something that no one had thought to prepare for. The silence in council space. The universe had been full of noise. Radio signals from 1,000 worlds. The hum of traffic between star systems. The constant chatter of civilization echoing through the void. But in the umbral expanse, there was nothing, just silence so deep that it seemed to have weight. It pressed against the mind. It crept into dreams. It whispered that humanity was alone, truly alone, in a universe that did not care if they lived or died. Some people could not handle it. They stopped eating. They stopped talking. They sat in corners and stared at walls until their hearts simply gave up. The doctors called it void sickness. Survivors called it something else. They called it the quiet death. Alina Vance died in the 3rd month of exile. Not from the silence, but from something simpler. Her heart weakened by decades of stress, and struggle finally stopped beating. She passed in her sleep, peaceful and quiet aboard the horizon's edge. Captain Marcus Chen stood over her body and wept. He was not ashamed of his tears. Alina had been more than an ambassador. She had been the voice that held humanity together, the fire that refused to go out. Without her, he did not know how to continue, but he knew that he had to. They held a funeral that was broadcast to every ship in the fleet. 300 million people watched as Alina's body was released into the void, given to the darkness that she had promised to conquer. Marcus spoke the words that would be passed down through generations. Alina Vance believed that humanity could survive anything. He said she believed that we were stronger than The darkness, smarter than the silence, more stubborn than the universe itself. Today we prove her right, not by mourning her death, but by honoring her life. We will survive. We will build. We will remember. The fleet moved on. The darkness continued. By the 5th year, everything had changed. The fleet had stopped being a fleet. It had become a collection of floating cities, held together by cables and bridges and desperate hope. Ships were stripped for parts. Engines were rebuilt. Living spaces were expanded by connecting vessels together in clusters that grew larger with each passing month. Marcus Chin had become Fleet Admiral, a title he had never wanted but could not refuse. He spent his days solving problems that had no good solutions. How do you grow food when there is no sunlight? How do you make fuel when there are no stars to harvest? How do you keep 300 million people alive when the universe seems determined to kill them? The answer he discovered was to change the rules. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was a physicist who had been considered brilliant even before the exile. In council space she had been studying the boundaries of known science, pushing against the limits of what was possible. The council had watched her work with nervous eyes. Some said that was part of why humanity had been exiled. Now in the umbral expanse, there was no one to tell her to stop. The council was wrong about this place, she told Marcus one day. They were standing in a laboratory that had been built from salvaged ship parts. Around them, instruments hummed and blinked, measuring things that had no names. They said the expanse was empty, dead. But it is not dead. It is different. She showed him the data. On a flickering screen, strain, patterns, impossible readings, energy, signatures that should not exist. What am I looking at? Marcus asked. The universe has rules, Yuki said. Laws of physics that govern everything, from atoms to galaxies. Those rules were created in the moment of the Big Bang, when all of existence was born in fire and light. But the umbral expanse, she pointed at the darkness beyond the viewport. This place is older than the Big Bang. It is a piece of what came before. And in this place the rules are different. Marcus stared at her. You are saying that physics works differently here. I am saying that physics is merely a suggestion here. Yuki replied. She smiled, and there was something wild in her eyes, something excited. The council sent us here to die, but they made a mistake. They sent us to the one place in the universe where we could reinvent everything. The discoveries came slowly. At first, then faster and faster. Yuki's team found that certain materials, when exposed to the strange energies of the expanse, changed their properties in useful ways. Metals became stronger. Fuels became more efficient. Engines could be redesigned to run on power sources that the council had never dreamed of. Other scientists made other discoveries. They found pockets of strange matter drifting through the void, remnants of stars that had died before the universe was born. They found gravitational currents that could be ridden like rivers, carrying ships across vast distances with almost no fuel. They found dimensions folded inside of dimensions, spaces where the normal rules did not apply. The children of the exile grew up learning these things. They had never known a proper sun or a proper sky. They had been born in the darkness, raised in the silence, shaped by the void itself. They called themselves the void-born, and they were different from the humans who had come before. They could see in lower light than any human before them. Their bodies had adapted to strain, gravities, and stranger pressures. They thought in ways that their parents found hard to follow, their minds shaped by universe that did not obey the old rules. And they were not afraid of the dark. They had never been anything else. 20 years after the exile, humanity had stopped dying. The floating cities had become proper stations built from materials harvested from rogue planets and dead stars. Farms grew food under artificial lights powered by energy that the council would have called impossible. Factories produced machines using techniques that had never been tried before. The population had fallen to 200 million, but it had stopped falling. Births began to equal deaths. Then births began to exceed deaths. Slowly, carefully, humanity began to grow again. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen was an old man now. His hair had turned white and his body had grown weak, but his mind was still sharp and his will was still strong. He had kept humanity alive through the worst years. Now he was watching something new begin. "We need to stop thinking like refugees," he said at a council meeting. The room was full of leaders from every station, every ship, every community that had formed in the darkness. The council wanted us to die out here. They expected us to spend our last years fighting over scraps, but that is not what we are doing. He gestured at the screens around the room, showing images of stations and ships and factories. "We are building," he said. "We are growing. We are becoming something new. It is time to accept what we are. We are not survivors anymore. We are pioneers, and this darkness is not our prison. It is our home." The room was silent for a moment, then slowly people began to nod. They had all felt it. The change that was happening, the transformation that the exile had forced upon them. Humanity was not the same species that had been cast out of council space. They had been changed by the void, shaped by the silence forged in the endless dark. They had become something stronger, something stranger, something that the council had never expected. 40 years after the exile, Marcus Chen died. He passed in his sleep, just as Alina Vance had. He was 90 years old, ancient by the standards of the old world, respected beyond measure by the people he had helped to save. His last words were spoken to his daughter, a void-born woman named Sarah, who had inherited her father's talent for navigation. "Do not forget," he whispered. "Do not forget why we are here. Do not forget what they did to us. And do not forget what we are building." Sarah held her father's hand as he slipped away. Then she stood, dry-eyed and determined, and walked out to face the council. "My father is dead," she said, "but his work continues. We have survived for 40 years. In a place where survival should have been impossible. We have built homes. The darkness, we have made the void our own. But we are not finished." She pointed at a map that showed the umbral expanse, stretching out in all directions, out there beyond our stations, beyond our ships. There is more space, more resources, more secrets waiting to be discovered. My father kept us alive. Now it is time to do more than survive. It is time to explore. It is time to expand. It is time to build an empire. The council agreed. The age of survival was over. The age of expansion had begun. By the 60th year, humanity had spread across a region of space larger Then the territory they had lost, hidden. Stations dotted the darkness like stars that had refused to die. Some were built into asteroids. Some floated in the void, held together by gravitational fields that bent space itself. Some were buried inside the corpses of brown dwarfs harvesting the last heat from failed stars. The technology had advanced beyond anything the Council had ever achieved. Ships could fold space and travel between dimensions. Weapons could tear holes in reality itself. Sensors could see through the fabric of existence and detect things that should not be possible. Dr. Yuki Tanaka had died years ago, but her work continued through her students and her children. Her granddaughter, Yuki Tanaka Chin, had inherited both her brilliance and her determination. She led a team of scientists who pushed the boundaries of what humanity could do. The Council thought they were sending us to die, she said at a research symposium. Instead, they sent us to the one place in the universe where we could evolve. The umbral expanse is not empty, it is full of possibilities that they were too afraid to explore, and we are exploring them. She showed the audience images of new technologies, ships that moved through shadows, weapons that could not be blocked by any shield, communication systems that worked instantly across any distance, power sources that drew energy from the fabric of space itself. This is what humanity has become, she said. Not refugees, not exiles. We are the masters of the void, and the void has made us strong. 75 years after the exile, humanity was ready, not ready for war. Not yet, but ready for something else. Ready to look back at the galaxy they had left behind, ready to see what the Council had done without them, ready to plan for the future. The new leader of humanity was a man named Alexander Volkov. He was tall and thin, with the pale skin and dark adapted eyes of the void born. He had been born in the darkness, raised in the silence, and he had never known the warmth of a proper sun, but he had heard the stories. He had learned the history. He knew what the Council had done to his people, and he had not forgiven them. We have built something extraordinary, he said at a gathering of all the station leaders. An empire in the shadows, a civilization in the void, but we did not build it because we wanted to. We built it because we had no choice. Because the Council decided that humanity did not deserve to live among the stars. He looked around the room at the faces of his people, void-born and earth-born, young and old, all of them united by a shared memory of betrayal. We have spent 75 years building strength, he said. We have spent 75 years learning secrets that the Council cannot imagine. We have spent 75 years preparing for the day when we would face them again. That day is not today, but it is coming. He activated a screen that showed a map of the galaxy. Council space glowed blue, fat and comfortable and complacent. The umbral expanse was marked in black, a shadow on the edge of everything. They think we are dead, Volkov said. They have forgotten our names. They tell stories about us to scare their children. But we are not dead, we are waiting, and when the time is right, we will remind them who we are. The room erupted in cheers. 75 years of pain and struggle and loss had forged humanity into something new, something hard, something patient. The Council had wanted humanity to die in the darkness. Instead, the darkness had made humanity stronger than ever. The umbral dominion was born. and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. In the silence of her laboratory, Yuki Tanaka-chan worked on the final piece of the puzzle. She was old now, nearly 70, but her mind was still sharp. She had spent her entire life studying the secrets of the expanse, pushing the boundaries of what was possible, and now she was close to her greatest breakthrough, a ship that could move through shadows, a ship that could appear anywhere without warning, a ship that could not be detected, could not be stopped, could not be defeated. She called it the Shadow Drive. This is how we go back, she whispered to herself. This is how we show them what we have become. She thought of her grandmother, who had believed that the expanse was full of possibilities. She thought of Marcus Chen, who had kept humanity alive through the darkest years. She thought of Alina Vance, who had walked out of the council chamber with fire in her eyes. They had all believed that humanity could survive anything. They had all believed that the darkness could not break the human spirit. They had been right. Yuki finished her work as the station hummed around her. In the void outside, 1,000 hidden ships waited in silence. 1 billion human hearts beat with the same patient determination. The council had exiled humanity. They had cast them into the shadows and hoped they would disappear, but humanity had not disappeared. Humanity had claimed the shadows as their own, and soon, very soon, the council would learn what that meant. The long dark was over. The age of shadows had begun. 100 years after the exile, the galaxy had forgotten humanity. In council space, life continued as it always had. The great powers traded and squabbled and made treaties that meant nothing. Lesser species served their masters and dreamed of freedom that would never come. The 12 elder races sat in their chambers and believed that they controlled the universe. They told stories about humanity. Sometimes parents warned their children about the arrogant species that had reached too far and paid the price. Teachers used humanity as an example of what happened to those who did not know their place. Politicians pointed to the umbral expanse and said that it proved the council's wisdom. No one knew that humanity was still alive. No one suspected that in the darkness beyond the galactic rim, an empire was growing. An empire built on patience, on secrecy, and on a burning desire for justice. They called themselves the Umbral Dominion, and they were watching everything. Supreme Commander Alexander Volkov stood in the heart of Shadow Station Prime, the largest and most secret installation in the Dominion. It had been built inside the dead core of a brown dwarf, a failed star that gave off just enough heat to power the massive facility. From outside it was invisible, just another piece of cosmic debris drifting through the endless night. Inside it was the center of human civilization. Volkov was 130 years old. Medical technology developed in the expanse had extended human lifespans far beyond what the council thought possible. He had been leading the Dominion for 50 years, guiding his people through the transition from survival to dominance. He had watched the fleet of refugees become an empire of shadows, and now he was watching the council tear itself apart. Show me the latest intelligence, he said to the woman standing beside him. Commander Yuki Tanaka-chan was old too, but her eyes were still sharp. She had inherited her grandmother's brilliance and her great-grandfather's determination. She had spent her life developing the technologies that kept The Dominion hidden, the stealth probes. The quantum entangled spies, the shadow. Networks that let humanity watch the galaxy without being seen. She activated a massive screen that filled one wall of the command center. Images appeared, ships, stations, worlds, all of them bearing the symbols of council species. The Velthari are dying, Yuki said. Their birth rates have been falling for centuries. They are down to less than 2 billion individuals across their entire empire. Their scientists have been trying to reverse the decline, but nothing works. They estimate that their species will be extinct within 500 years. Volkov watched the images of Velthari cities, once proud and beautiful, now half empty and crumbling. What else? He asked. Kreth hegemony has been expanding again. Yuki changed the images to show massive warships moving through space. They have conquered 3 new species in the past decade. They claim it is for security, but our intelligence suggests they are stripping those worlds for resources. Their own planets are becoming depleted. And the Orium, the worst of all. Yuki's voice turned cold. Remember they protected worlds, the ones the Council declared off-limits. Because of their unique ecosystems, the Orium have been secretly mining them for centuries. They have driven at least 12 species to extinction to fuel their economy, and the Council has done nothing because the Orium pay the largest share of the Common Defense Fund. Volkov watched the evidence play. Across the screen, videos of strip-mined planets, images of enslaved populations, data showing corruption and cruelty on a scale that would have shocked the humans who had been exiled 200 years ago. The Council has not changed, he said. Quietly. No, Yuki agreed. They are exactly what they always were. They exiled us because they feared we would upset their order, but their order was built on suffering and lies. They were never the wise elders they claimed to be. They were just powerful. Volkov turned away from the screen. He walked to a viewport that looked out into the void. The darkness was complete, but he had been born in that darkness. He was not afraid of it. How many ships do we have now? He asked. 12,000 combat vessels, Yuki replied, all equipped with shadow drive technology, all crewed by void-born soldiers who have trained their entire lives for this moment, plus another 50,000 support ships, enough to supply a prolonged campaign, and our weapons, phase disruptors that can bypass any shield the Council has ever developed. No. Torpedoes that can tear holes in space itself, shadow bombs that can delete matter from existence. Yuki paused. We could destroy them, Alexander. We could wipe out the Council and take their territory for ourselves. Volkov was quiet for a long moment, then he shook his head. No, he said, that is not why. We have spent 200 years building in the darkness. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers. If we become what they feared, then they were right to exile us. Then what are we? Yuki asked. Volkov turned to face her. His eyes, adapted to the void, seemed to glow with an inner light. We are the reckoning, he said. We are the proof that their crimes have consequences. We are not here to destroy the Council. We are here to expose them, to show the galaxy what they truly are. And then we will let the galaxy decide what happens next. The preparations took another 100 years. Humanity had learned patience in the darkness. They had learned to plan in terms of generations, not years. They had learned that the best victories were the ones that seemed inevitable in hindsight. During those 100 years, The Dominion grew stronger, new technologies were developed, new ships were built, new soldiers were trained, but more important than any of that was the intelligence network that spread across Council space like invisible roots. Stealth probes drifted through enemy territory, recording everything. Quantum entangled communicators allowed instant transmission of data across any distance. Human agents surgically altered to look like other species infiltrated the governments and militaries of every council member. They learned everything. They learned which officials were corrupt and which were honest. They learned which military officers would fight to the death and which would surrender at the first sign of trouble. They learned the location of every secret base, every hidden weapon, every buried crime. They compiled databases that contained more information about the council than the council had about itself, and they waited for the right moment to use it. 190 years after the exile, Supreme Commander Volkov died. He passed peacefully, surrounded by his family and his closest advisors. He was 220 years old, ancient even by the extended standards of the Dominion. He had led humanity for a century and a half. He had transformed a scattered fleet of refugees into an empire that could have conquered the galaxy. His last words were spoken to his successor, a woman named Myra Volkov-Chen. She was his great-granddaughter, a product of the merger between two of humanity's most important families. She had his determination and Yuki Tanaka-Chen's brilliance. She was everything humanity needed for the next phase. Remember the goal, Volkov whispered, not conquest, not revenge, justice. Show them who we are. Show them what they did, and then give them a choice. Myra held his hand as he faded away. Then she stood and addressed the gathered leaders. My great-grandfather spent his life preparing for this moment, she said. He believed that humanity could be better than its enemies. He believed that we could win without becoming what they feared. I share that belief, and I will honor his memory by finishing what he started. She activated the main display. It showed a map of the galaxy with Council space marked in blue and the Umbral Dominion marked in black. The black area was larger than anyone in Council space would have believed possible. We have spent 200 years building our strength, Myra said. We have watched the Council. We have learned their secrets. We have prepared our forces, and now at last we are ready. She touched a control and the map changed. Red lines appeared, showing attack vectors. Green dots showed positions where Dominion ships were already waiting. Yellow markers indicated targets of critical importance. In 3 years we will begin the return, Myra said. Not with an invasion, not with a war, with something more powerful. The truth. We will show the galaxy what the Council truly is. We will expose every crime, every lie, every betrayal, and then we will offer them something better. The room was silent. Everyone understood what she was proposing. It was not just a military operation. It was the end of an era. My great-grandfather was exiled from Council space 200 years ago, Myra continued. He was told that humanity did not deserve a place among the stars. He was told that we were too dangerous, too ambitious, too arrogant, but he never believed them, and neither do I. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every leader, Every commander, every representative, we are humanity, she said. We were born in darkness, we were raised in silence, we were forged in the void, and now we are going home. The next 3 years were the busiest in the history of the Umbral Dominion. Fleets were positioned in the darkness just beyond the border of council space. Agents were activated in every major government. Communication networks were prepared to broadcast on every frequency in the galaxy. Everything was checked, double-checked and checked again. Myra Volkovichin worked without rest, coordinating every aspect of the operation. She reviewed intelligence reports, approved tactical plans, and recorded the messages that would be broadcast when the time came. She barely slept, barely ate, barely stopped moving. You are going to kill yourself, said her chief advisor, an old man named Thomas, who had served 3 generations of leaders. I will rest when it is over, Myra replied. That is what your great-grandfather said, and your great-grandmother, and every leader before them. Thomas shook his head. Humanity survived 200 years in the void. You need to survive long enough to see what we have built. Myra paused. She looked out the viewport at the darkness that had been her home for her entire life. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the expanse, the council was going about its business. They had no idea what was coming. Do you remember the stories? She asked. The ones they told about the first days of exile. I remember, Thomas said. Elena Vance told the council that humanity would remember. She said that one day they would see which side made the right choice. Myra turned to face him. I am going to prove her right. I am going to show the galaxy that humanity is not what the council feared. We are what they should have hoped for. Thomas smiled. Then you should get some sleep. History needs its witnesses to be awake. Myra laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in months. 3 more years, she said. Then we show them who we are. 203 years after the exile. Everything was ready. 12,000 warships waited in the shadows. 50,000 support vessels carried supplies for a campaign that could last for decades. 1 billion human soldiers stood ready to fight for a home they had never seen. Communication arrays were aimed at every populated world in the galaxy. Myra Volkovichin stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive vessel called the Shadow's Edge. It was the most advanced ship ever built, equipped with technologies that the council could not even imagine. It could appear anywhere without warning. It could defeat any enemy. It could not be stopped. Around her, the crew worked in silence. Void-born soldiers with dark adapted eyes and enhanced bodies. Engineers who could rebuild a ship. The middle of a battle, scientists who understood the secrets of the expanse better than anyone in council space. Understood their own physics. They were ready. After 200 years of preparation, they were finally ready. Open a channel to all ships, Myra said. The communication officer nodded. Channel open. Myra took a breath. This was the moment that her ancestors had dreamed of. This was the moment that humanity had been building towards since the day they were cast into the void. My name is Myra Volkovichin, she said. I am the Supreme Commander of the Umbral Dominion. 203 years ago, the Galactic Council exiled humanity to the darkness. They hoped we would die. They hoped we would disappear. They hoped we would become nothing more than a cautionary tale told to frighten children. She paused, letting her words sink in. They were wrong, she continued. We did not die, we did not disappear. We survived, we adapted, we built an empire in the shadows that they were too afraid to explore, and now at last, we are ready to show them what we have become. She looked out at the darkness one last time. Then she turned to face the camera, and her eyes burned with 2 centuries of patient determination. Today we begin the return, she said, not as refugees begging for mercy, not as conquerors seeking revenge, but as humanity, the species that was too dangerous for the Council to accept, the species that survived the unsurvivable, the species that claimed the void as its own. She smiled. It was not a kind smile. The Council thinks they know what humanity is, she said. They are about to learn how wrong they were. She nodded to the navigation officer. All ships, she commanded, execute Operation Homecoming. 12,000 ships activated their shad drives. Space twisted, reality bent, and humanity, after 200 years of exile, finally began its journey home. The Empire of Whispers had spoken, and the galaxy was about to hear. Counselor Thylik of the Orium Collective was having a very good evening. His estate on the capital world of Orium Prime was filled with the most powerful beings in the galaxy, diplomats, generals, corporate leaders, and royalty from 100 species mingled beneath crystal chandeliers that had been crafted million years ago. Servants moved through the crowd carrying drinks that cost more than most planets earned in a year. It was the social event of the season, and Thylik was at the center of it all. He had spent centuries building his influence. He had made deals that would have horrified the idealistic founders of the Council. He had crushed rivals and absorbed their assets. He had committed crimes that would never be discovered because he had the power to make evidence disappear. Tonight he was celebrating the completion of his greatest achievement, a trade agreement that would give the Orium Collective control over 60% of all rare mineral production in Council space. It had taken 50 years of manipulation to make it happen. Bribery, blackmail, assassination, all the tools of realpolitik. He raised his glass to toast his success. The crowd fell silent, waiting for his words, and then every screen in the room went dark. Thylik frowned. Technical difficulties were not supposed to happen at his events. He had people whose job was to prevent exactly this kind of embarrassment. Someone would be executed for this. Then the screens flickered back on, and a face appeared. It was a human face. The crowd gasped. Some of the guests stumbled backward in shock. A few screamed. The humans had been extinct for 200 years. Everyone knew that. Council had made sure of it, but here was a human woman looking out from every screen, her eyes dark and calm and utterly unafraid. My name is Yuki Tanaka-chen, she said. I am the granddaughter of exiles. I am the great-great-granddaughter of those you cast into the void, and I am here to deliver a message. Thylik dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, but he did not notice. 203 years ago, the Galactic Council sentenced humanity to death. Tanaka-chen continued. You did not call it that. You called it exile. You called it mercy. But you sent 300 million people into a place where you knew they could not survive. You hoped they would die quietly, and Then you forgot about them. Her face disappeared, replaced by images, ships emerging from the void, stations that stretched across the darkness, cities built inside dead stars, technology that made Council science look primitive. They did not die, she said. They survived, they built, they evolved, and now they have returned. The images changed. Again. This time they showed something else. Documents, videos, records that Thylak recognized with a cold surge of terror. His own records, his own crimes, the protected worlds that the Orium had strip-mined, the species they had driven to extinction, the bribes they had paid, and the officials they had murdered. The Orium Collective has been committing crimes against the galaxy for centuries. Tanaka-chan said, this is the evidence. Every transaction, every death, every lie. The Council knew about some of it. They looked the other way because the Orium paid them well, but now everyone will. No, the people of the galaxy will see exactly what kind of creatures have been leading them. Thylak tried to move, tried to shut off the screens, tried to do something, but his body would not respond. His security systems had been frozen. His communications had been blocked. He was helpless, surrounded by guests who were watching his empire crumble in real time. This is not revenge, Tanaka-chan said. Revenge would be too small for what you did to us. This is justice. And it is only the beginning. The screens went dark. The room was silent except for the sound of Thylak's heavy breathing. Then the questions started, and the accusations, and the chaos across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, the same scene was playing out. The truth about the Council was being broadcast on every frequency. 200 years of secrets were spilling out for everyone to see. Humanity had returned, and they had come bearing gifts. Velthari Archon was very old. He was the same Archon who had sentenced humanity to exile 2 centuries ago. His species lived for thousands of years, and he remembered that day clearly. The human ambassador with fire in her eyes, the promise that humanity would remember, the certainty that he was making the right decision. Now he sat in his private chamber, watching the galaxy burn, and wondered if he had been wrong. The broadcasts had been playing for 3 days. Every species in Council space had seen the evidence, the Orium crimes, the Creeth atrocities, the secret deals and hidden betrayals that had kept the Council in power for millions of years. Revolts were breaking out on 100 worlds. Lesser species that had been oppressed for generations were rising up against their masters. Trade routes were collapsing as allies turned into enemies. The careful order that the Council had maintained for eons was falling apart, and throughout it, all human ships were appearing. They came out of nowhere, materializing like ghosts. They struck supply lines and military bases with surgical precision. They did not destroy cities or massacre populations. They simply took control. Their soldiers moving through Council defenses like they were not even there. The Archon had ordered his fleets to respond. The mighty Velthari Armada, pride of the elder races, had moved to intercept the human invaders. They had not returned. The reports described ships that could not be detected, weapons that could not be blocked, tactics that could not be countered. The Velthari Grand Fleet, 10,000 ships that had enforced Council law for 1,000,000 years, had been surrounded in 3 dimensions by vessels that seemed to phase through. Their shields like smoke, they had not been destroyed, they had been captured. 10,000 ships, millions of soldiers, the entire military might of the Velthari. People taken without a single shot. Being fired, the Archon's hands trembled. As he watched the reports, this was not a war. This was a demonstration. The humans were showing that they could have destroyed the Council at any time. They were choosing not to. That was somehow more terrifying than any invasion. A chime sounded. Someone was requesting entry to his chamber. The Archon hesitated, then allowed it. Human woman walked in. She was tall and pale, with the dark adapted eyes that the intelligence reports had mentioned. She wore a simple uniform with a symbol on the shoulder, a black sun surrounded by stars. Archon, she said, my name is Commander Yuki Tanakashin. I believe we have some things to discuss. The Archon stared at her. He remembered another human woman who had stood before him 2 centuries ago. This one had the same fire in her eyes. How did you get past my guards? He asked. There was no need to harm them, Tanakashin replied. They are simply asleep. They will wake up in a few hours with no memory of this visit. You could have killed them. Yes, we could have killed everyone on this world. We could have destroyed your entire species in a single day. She smiled, and there was no warmth in it. But that is not why we came back. Archon rose from his seat. Despite his age, despite his fear, he still had his pride. Then why did you come back? For revenge, to gloat over our downfall? No, Tanakashin said. We came back to give you a choice. She activated a small device, and a holographic display appeared between them. It showed the galaxy, with Council space marked in blue and another region marked in black. This is what we have built in the 200 years since you exiled us, she said. Umbral Dominion, a civilization that spans 1,000 hidden stations and a billion human souls. We have technologies you cannot imagine and resources you cannot count. We could conquer the galaxy if we wanted to. Then why don't you? The Archon asked. Because Elena Vance was right. Tanakashin looked at him with those dark ancient eyes. She told you that humanity would remember. She told you that one day the universe would see which side made the right choice. We remember, Archon. Every human child learns the story of the exile. Every human soldier carries the memory of what was done to us. She stepped closer to him. But we also learned something else. In the darkness, she said, we learned that revenge is a poison. It destroys the one who carries it more than the one it is aimed at. If we conquered the Council, if we burned worlds and enslaved your peoples, we would become exactly what you accused us of being, and we refused to do that. The Archon was silent for a long moment. What do you want? The Council is finished, Tanakashin said. Your secrets have been exposed. Your alliances are breaking apart. Species you oppressed are rising up. In a year, maybe 2, there will be nothing left of the order you built. She deactivated the display. We are offering you a chance to build something better, she said. A new alliance, not ruled by the strongest, but guided by principles, freedom for all species, justice for crimes committed, cooperation instead of domination, and if we refuse, then we will leave. Tanakashin shrugged. We have our own civilization. We do not need Council space. We came here to offer you a choice, not to force you to accept it. Humanity spent 200 years in exile. We can spend another 200 watching you destroy yourselves. The Archon sank back into his seat. He had lived for thousands of years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had made decisions that shaped the fate of entire species, but he had never faced a choice like this. Why? He asked quietly. Why offer us mercy after what we did to you? Tanakashin looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was softer than before, because 200 years ago, a woman named Elena Vance walked out of this council with her head held high. She said she did not curse you, she did not threaten you, she simply said that humanity would remember, and she was right. We remember everything. She turned toward the door. We remember the exile. We remember the darkness. We remember the friends who died and the homes we lost, but we also remember who we are. Humans, the species that survived the unsurvivable, the species that built an empire in the void, the species that had every reason for revenge but chose justice instead. She paused at the door and looked back at him. The choice is yours, Archon. You can hold on to your pride and watch your civilization burn, or you can accept our hand and help build something new. Either way, humanity will survive. The only question is whether the Velthari will survive with us. She walked out, leaving the ancient Archon alone with his thoughts. The war, such as it was, lasted 8 months. It was not really a war. It was more like a controlled collapse. Human forces appeared wherever they were needed, taking control of key installations and preventing the chaos from spreading. Council fleets surrendered without fighting when they realized that resistance was impossible. Governments fell and were replaced by provisional councils that answered to no one but their own people. The crimes of the council were prosecuted in open courts. The Orium leaders who had ordered the destruction of protected worlds were sentenced to spend their remaining lives restoring the ecosystems they had destroyed. The Kreeth officers who had ordered massacres were stripped of their ranks and sent to work in hospitals, healing instead of hurting. The corrupt officials who had looked the other way were exposed and removed from power. It was not gentle, it was not painless, but it was fair. Every accusation was supported by evidence. Every defendant had the right to speak in their own defense. Justice was served, but it was justice, not vengeance, and through it all humanity stood as witnesses. They did not rule. They did not conquer. They simply ensured that the process was fair. This is not what I expected, said the Velthari Archon. He was standing on a balcony overlooking the capital city of Velthari Prime. Beside him stood Supreme Commander Myra Volkovshin, who had arrived to oversee the final stages of the transition. What did you expect? She asked. Revenge, destruction. The things we were afraid of when we exiled you. He shook his ancient head. We were so certain that humanity would try to conquer the galaxy, that you would use your power to dominate everyone else. It is what we would have done. We know, Myra said. We spent 200 years watching you, learning your secrets, understanding how you thought. She looked out at the city where Velthari citizens were going about their lives, largely unaffected by the changes happening around them. If we had wanted revenge, we could have taken it 100 times over, but that would have meant becoming you. And we decided long ago that we would rather be human. The Archon was quiet. For a moment, the Council exiled you, because we were afraid of what you might become. We thought that if we did not stop you, you would eventually threaten our power. You were right to be afraid. Myra said, we did become something threatening. We became something you could not control, could not predict, could not defeat. But you were wrong about what we would do with that power. She turned to face him. Humanity was never going to conquer the galaxy, she said. We do not want to rule. We want to explore, to learn, to grow. We want to see what is beyond the next star and the next and the next after that. The Council saw that and thought it was ambition. But it was just curiosity. The same curiosity that carried us from caves to stars. The Archon nodded slowly. And now, what will humanity do now that the Council is gone? Myra smiled. It was the first real smile she had shown since the return began. Now we keep going, she said. There is an entire universe out there. We have only seen a tiny piece of it. The umbral expanse taught us that the impossible is possible. The void taught us that the darkness is not something to fear. We are going to keep pushing forward, keep exploring, keep asking questions. She looked up at the stars, and this time, we want you to come with us. Declaration ceremony took place on neutral ground, a space station at the exact center of what had been Council space. Representatives from every species attended, packed into a chamber that had been designed for this moment. Myra Volkovchan stood at the podium. Behind her, a banner displayed the new symbol of the Alliance, a circle of stars surrounding a dark center, light embracing shadow, the known embracing the unknown. Today we declare the end of the Galactic Council, she said, and the beginning of something new. The crowd murmured, some with hope, some with fear, all with uncertainty. The Council was built on power, Myra continued, on the idea that some species were better than others, that the strong had the right to rule the weak, that the universe was a place to be controlled and exploited. She paused. Humanity was exiled because we did not fit that vision. We were too curious, too ambitious, too willing to question the way things were. The Council saw us as a threat to their order. They were right. We were a threat, but not because we wanted to conquer them. Because we refused to accept that the universe belonged to anyone. She gestured at the crowd. Look around you. 100 species, 1,000 worlds, million different ways of seeing the universe. For too long, you have been told that there is only one way to live, one way to think, one set of rules that everyone must follow, but that is not true. There are as many ways to live as there are stars in the sky. She stepped back from the podium. The umbral Dominion is not here to replace the Council. We are here to offer something different, a partnership, an alliance built on respect instead of fear, on cooperation instead of domination, on the belief that every species, no matter how young or how old, has something to offer. She looked around the room, meeting eyes of 100 different colors and shapes. We call this new alliance the Stellar Compact. It has only one rule: everyone is equal, everyone has a voice, everyone gets to choose their own path. If you want to join us, the door is open. If you want to go your own way, we will not stop you. We are not here to rule. We are here to explore And we want you to explore with us. She raised her hand, and the lights in the chamber dimmed. The ceiling became transparent, revealing the stars above. 200 years ago, humanity was cast into the darkness, she said. Today we stand in the light, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as partners, as equals, as a species that survived the unsurvivable and chose to share what we learned instead of using it to destroy. She smiled. The void is not empty. The darkness is not the end. The universe is full of wonders that we have not yet imagined, and now for the first time in history, we can explore them together. The chamber erupted in applause. It started with the lesser species, the ones who had been oppressed for so long. Then it spread to the merchants, and the scientists, and the explorers. Even some of the elder species joined in, those who had grown tired of the council stagnation. Humanity had returned from the shadows, and they had brought hope with them. The Stellar Compact was born, and the future had just begun. 5 years had passed since the fall of the council. The galaxy was still healing. Old wounds do not close quickly, and the wounds left by millions of years of oppression and exploitation ran deep. Some species struggled to adapt to freedom after countless generations of servitude. Some species resented giving up the power they had held for so long. Some simply did not know how to live in a universe where the old rules no longer applied. But slowly, things were getting better. The stellar compact had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a handful of species who believed in humanity's vision had expanded to include most of the inhabited worlds in the galaxy. Trade routes that had been controlled by the council were now open to everyone. Technologies that had been hoarded by the elder races were being shared freely. The barriers that had separated species for millions of years were coming down, and humanity was at the center of it all, not as rulers, not as conquerors, but as explorers, teachers, partners. The umbral dominion had opened its borders, sharing the technologies they had developed in the void. Shadow drives were being adapted for use by other species. The strange sciences of the expanse were being studied by researchers from 100 worlds. Secrets that humanity had learned in 200 years of exile were becoming the foundation for a new age of discovery. Supreme Commander Myra Volkovchan stood on the observation deck of the Stellar Compact's capital station, watching ships from 100 species pass in peaceful cooperation. She was getting old now, her hair gray and her face lined with the marks of a life spent in service. But her eyes were still sharp and her mind was still active. It is strange, she said to the woman standing beside her. I spent my entire life preparing for war, planning for the moment when we would face the council and show them what we had become. And now that it is over, I do not quite know what to do with myself. The woman was named Alara, and she was the newly elected Speaker of the Compact Assembly. She was not human, she was Velthari, young by her species standards, barely 500 years old. Her scales shimmered in the starlight, shifting from blue to purple as she moved. You could retire, Alara suggested. You have earned it. The Dominion has other leaders. The Compact has its own government. Humanity does not need you to guide them anymore. Myra smiled. Humans are terrible at retirement. We Always have to be doing something. Moving forward, exploring. Building. It is who we are. Is that why your species survived the expanse? Alara asked. Because you cannot stand still. Partly. Myra looked out at the stars. But it is also because we are stubborn. We refuse to accept that anything is impossible. We look at obstacles and see challenges. We look at the unknown and see opportunities. The council thought they were sending us to die. Instead, they sent us to the one place in the universe where that stubbornness was exactly what was needed. Alara was quiet for a moment. She had grown up with the stories of humanity, stories of a dangerous species that had to be controlled, stories of a reckless race that would destroy the galaxy if given the chance. The stories had all been lies, but they were hard to forget. I was not born when your people were exiled, she said finally, but my grandfather was on the council. He voted for your banishment. Myra turned to look at her. Does that bother you sometimes? Alara's scales shifted to a darker shade. He thought he was doing the right thing, protecting the galaxy from a threat, but he was wrong. And now I am standing here, working beside the people he tried to destroy. Do you blame yourself for his choices? No, Alara shook her head, but I wonder sometimes if he had voted differently. If the council had given humanity chance, would we have reached this point? Without all the suffering, without the 200 years of exile, without the crimes that the council committed in your absence? Myra thought about the question. She thought about Alina Vance, who had walked out of the council chamber with fire in her eyes. She thought about Marcus Chen, who had kept the fleet alive through the darkest years. She thought about all the humans who had been born and died in the void, never knowing the warmth of a proper sun. I do not know, she said honestly. Maybe we would have found another path. Maybe the council would have accepted us. Eventually, maybe everything would have been different. She turned back to the viewport, but that is not what happened, she continued. What happened is that we were exiled. What happened is that we survived. What happened is that we built something extraordinary in the darkness, and now we are sharing it with the galaxy. I cannot change the past. I can only decide what to do with the present. Alara nodded slowly. That is a very human way of thinking. Is it? Myra smiled. I always thought it was just common sense. The memorial was built on the border between council space and the umbral expanse. It was a simple structure, just a pillar of dark stone floating in the void. But carved into that stone were names. 300 million names, every human who had been exiled from council space 208 years ago. Most of those names belonged to people who had died in the early years of the exile, when supplies ran out and ships broke down, and the void claimed its toll in the middle years, when the struggle to survive took everything humanity had. Even in the later years, when the Dominion was strong and prosperous, people still died of old age, of accidents, of the simple fact that even in a civilization of wonders, nothing lasts forever. But some of those names belonged to people who were still alive, the last survivors of the original exile, the ones who remembered what it was like to live in council space, the ones who had seen the trial, the sentence, the long journey into the dark. There were not many of them left, a few dozen at Most medical technology could extend life, but it could not make people immortal. One by one, the first generation was fading away. Today, one more name would be added to the memorial. Commander Yuki Tanaka-chan died in her sleep at the age of 243. She had been the last of the great scientists who had unlocked the secrets of the expanse. She had developed the shadow drive. She had led the team that created the technologies that let humanity survive and thrive in the void. She had been there when the return began, delivering the message that announced humanity's survival to a galaxy that had forgotten them. Her funeral was attended by millions, not just humans, but representatives from every species in the stellar compact. They came to honor a woman who had helped change the shape of the universe. Myra Volkovchin spoke the eulogy. Yuki Tanaka-chan was born in the void, she said. She never knew the sun that her grandparents had left behind. She never walked on a proper planet. Until she was 60 years old, she spent her entire life in the darkness, surrounded by dead stars and impossible geometries. She paused, looking at the crowd gathered before her, but she never thought of herself as trapped. She never thought of the expanse as a prison. To her, it was a laboratory, a playground, a place full of mysteries waiting to be solved. She looked at the impossible and said, "Let me understand this." And then she did. Myra gestured at the memorial pillar behind her. 300 million humans were exiled to the void. Most of them did not survive, but the ones who did, the ones like Yuki, refused to accept that the darkness was the end. They refused to believe that the universe had nothing left to teach them. They looked at the expanse and saw not death but opportunity. She turned to face the pillar, running her fingers over the carved names. These are the names of our ancestors, the ones who sacrificed everything so that we could stand here today. Some of them died in despair, never believing that humanity would survive. Some of them died in hope, trusting that their children would find a way. All of them are remembered. She stepped back and bowed her head. Yuki Tanaka-chan was one of the last, one of the few who remembered what it was like before the exile, one of the few who could tell us from personal experience what humanity went through in those first terrible years. Now she is gone, and we are left to carry on without her. She looked up and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But that is what humans do. We carry on. We remember. We honor the past while building the future. Yuki would not want us to mourn her for long. She would want us to keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible. She smiled despite the sadness. Rest now, Yuki. You have earned it. We will take it from here. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The stellar compact grew and evolved. New species joined, old wounds healed. The galaxy slowly forgot the pain of the Council's fall and embraced the possibilities of the new order. Humanity changed too. The Voidborn had children, and those children had children. Each generation was a little different from the last, a little more adapted to the strain universe they had inherited, a little more comfortable with technologies that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. But some things did not change. Humans still asked questions. They still looked at the unknown and saw challenges instead of barriers. They still refused to accept that anything was truly impossible, and they still remembered. Every human child learned the story of the exile. They learned about Elena Vance, who had walked out of the council chamber with her head held high. They learned about Marcus Chen, who had kept the fleet alive through the darkest years. They learned about Yuki Tanaka Chen, who had unlocked the secrets of the void. They learned about Myra Volkov Chen, who had led humanity home. The story was taught in schools and told around dinner tables and passed down from generation to generation, not as a source of anger or resentment, but as a reminder of what humanity had been through, a reminder of what they had overcome, a reminder of who they were. We are the species that survived the unsurvivable, the story went. We are the species that built an empire in the darkness. We are the species that had every reason for revenge but chose justice instead. We are human, and there is nothing in the universe that can break us. 300 years after the exile, humanity reached the edge of the galaxy, not the umbral expanse which they had long since mapped and colonized, not council space, which had become just another part of the stellar compact, but the true edge, the place where the stars ended and the intergalactic void began. A fleet of exploration ships gathered at the boundary. They were crewed by humans and Velthari and Kreth and a dozen other species. The old enemies had become partners, united by the vision that humanity had brought back from the darkness. Admiral Kira Tanaka Volkov stood on the bridge of the lead ship, looking out at the emptiness beyond. She was the direct descendant of both Yuki Tanaka Chen and Myra Volkov Chen. She carried their blood and their legacy and their determination. What do we know about what is out there? She asked her science officer. A young Orium named Thex checked his instruments. Almost nothing. The intergalactic void is vast. The distance between galaxies is measured in millions of light years. No one has ever tried to cross it before. Has anyone ever said it cannot be done? Thex smiled. He had worked with humans long enough to know where this was going. Yes, Admiral. Everyone says it cannot be done. Kira smiled back. Then it sounds like a challenge. She turned to face the viewport. The darkness beyond was deeper than anything she had ever seen, deeper even than the umbral expanse. It was the void between galaxies, the empty space where nothing existed for distances that the mind could barely comprehend. Her ancestors had faced a darkness like this. Once they had been told it was impossible. They had been told they would die. They had been cast into the void by enemies who hoped they would disappear. Instead, they had survived. They had built, they had become something that the galaxy had never seen before. Open a channel to the fleet, Kira said. The communication officer nodded. Channel open. Kira took a breath. She thought about Elena Vance, who had promised that humanity would remember. She thought about all the generations who had lived and died in the void, building the foundations for this moment. This is Admiral Kira Tanaka Volkov of the Stellar Compact Exploration Fleet, she said. 300 years ago, my ancestors were exiled to the darkness at the edge of known space. They were told that the void would kill them, that they would disappear and be forgot, that humanity would end in the silence between stars. She paused, letting her words sink in. They were wrong. Humanity did not end. We survived. We Grew, we thrived, and then we came back and showed the galaxy that the darkness is not something to fear, it is something to explore. She gestured at the emptiness beyond the viewport. Out there is the greatest darkness we have ever faced, the void between galaxies. Millions of light years of nothing, no stars, no planets, no way station, just the endless black. She smiled, and in that smile was 300 years of human stubbornness and determination. They say it cannot be crossed. They say we will fail. They say we are reaching too far, pushing too hard, asking questions that should not be asked. Her eyes gleamed. That is what they said about the umbral expanse, and look where we are now. She turned to her crew. They were watching her with eyes full of hope and trust in the same stubborn fire that had carried humanity from caves to stars to the edge of the universe. We are human, she said. We were born in darkness. We were raised in silence. We were forged in the void, and there is no void deep enough to break us, no darkness vast enough to swallow us, no challenge great enough to make us turn back. She faced the viewport one last time. All ships prepare for jump. Destination the unknown. The engines of 100 ships powered up, space twisted, reality bent, and humanity once again ventured into the darkness. Behind them, the galaxy they had saved grew small. Ahead of them, a new frontier waited to be explored. The last message they sent before the jump was received across the stellar compact. It was broadcast on every frequency, heard by every species, recorded for future generations. It was simple, just a few words, but it carried the weight of 3 centuries of survival and struggle and triumph. We are humanity. We claim the void, and now we claim the universe. Then the ships disappeared into the darkness, and a new chapter began. Some said they would never be heard from again, that the intergalactic void was too vast, too empty, too impossible for even humanity to conquer. But those who knew humanity knew better. Somewhere in the endless darkness between galaxies, human ships were pushing forward. Human scientists were making discoveries. Human explorers were asking questions that no one had ever asked before. Because that is what humanity does. That is who humanity is. The species that survived the unsurvivable. The species that built an empire in the shadows. The species that had every reason for revenge but chose justice instead. The species that looked at the void and called it home. And somewhere in whatever afterlife exists for those who have gone before. Alina Vance was smiling. Humanity had remembered. Humanity had returned. And humanity would never stop reaching for the stars.